5 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few wide receivers I would bench this week. The first guy is Allen Robinson of the Chicago Bears. So far this season, it's been a disappointing season here for Robinson, who was drafted late second, early third round in most fantasy drafts last month before the season. So right here in PPR leagues, he's only reached double digits so far in the first month of the season. In week 2 versus the Cincinnati Bengals, we had 2 catches for 24 yards and a touchdown. Then week 3 at Cleveland, 2 catches, 27 yards. And last week versus a weak Detroit Lion defense, only 3 catches for 63 yards. So right here in week 5, another pretty tough matchup at the Las Vegas Raiders that give up the 10th least amount of fantasy points to wide receivers. And Justin Fields, he was named the starter the rest of the season. So Matt Nagy, he went against his word, saying if Dalton's healthy, he's going to be the starter. But whatever happened over the last few days here changed his mind. And right now, Fields and Robinson haven't been on the same page since Fields started in week 3. And last week, he caught a couple long balls towards the end of the game. But here versus the Raiders are playing pretty decent defense. Keenan Allen or Mike Williams didn't do much versus them in last week's ball game, and they gave up 28 points. So right here, I got no confidence in Robinson. He's not doing much this season, and it's a tough road matchup for him. So this week, he's going to see the bench. The next wide receiver I would bench this week's Brandon Cooks of the Houston Texans. So Cooks versus one of his former teams here in the New England Patriots coming to town, and the Patriots give up the 3rd least amount of fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. But so far, Cooks, he's been very solid this year, especially the first 3 weeks of the season, where Cooks cracked 18 or more fantasy points in PPR leagues. And then last week at Buffalo, 5 catches, 47 yards. But right here, Bill Belichick, he likes to take the top option out from the opposing team's best player. And that's what he's going to do in this one. He's going to take Brandon Cooks out, and he's going to see if Mark Ingram and other guys could step up for this Houston Texan team and try to beat them that way. But right here, David Mills is not a good quarterback so far in what we've seen from him the first few weeks of the season. And right here, Cooks was producing. But this week, Belichick takes him out, in my opinion, and he has a mediocre day once again like he did last week. The next wide receiver I will bench is Juju SmithSchuster of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Juju SmithSchuster, it's been a bad season for him once again. Last year he was pretty bad in fantasy football, and this year so far only one good game in week 2, where he had a rushing touchdown in that ball game and 6 catches for 41 yards with 16.40 fantasy points in PPR leagues. And besides that, he hasn't done anything. And right here, week 5 versus the Denver Broncos, I don't think he's going to do much again in this one. This is going to be a grind-out type of game, even though I could see the Steelers get off to an early start. And I think it's going to be only Deontay Johnson and Najee Harris worthy of a fantasy start this week on this Pittsburgh Steelers offense. So right here, you can't trust Juju. He's even been dropped in 5% of fantasy leagues over the last couple days here. And right here, week 5 versus Denver, he's an easy guy to bench. The next wide receiver is Mike Williams of the Los Angeles Chargers. So Williams in week 4 came down to earth finally, and he didn't put up a big game at all in that ball game versus the Vegas Raiders. And the Raiders, they play good defense, and they got the hard-hitting safeties back there as well. So Williams in week 4, he was non-existent. 1 catch for 11 yards on 4 targets. And the first 3 weeks of the season, he was one of the best receivers in fantasy football. And here, week 5, it's a pretty tough matchup versus the Cleveland Browns, who give up the 5th least amount of fantasy points to wide receivers this season. I know Justin Herbert and Mike Williams have a good rapport, but right here, he's more of a deep and go type of player, not much of a route runner. So right here, if that's all, Mike Williams is going to keep running. Teams are going to catch on, and he's going to hit a cold streak. And last week was a down game, and I think this week once again will be a down game here for Mike Williams. And I would put him on the bench. And the 5th and final receiver I would bench this week's Christian Kirk of the Arizona Cardinals. So the Cardinals, they got so many weapons on offense, especially at the wide receiver position. You got Hopkins, you got A.J. Green, who's emerged this season for them, Ronaldo Moore, Christian Kirk, Isabella as well. So right here, it's been 2 good weeks and 2 games he didn't show up this season so far for Kirk. The good games, week 1 at Tennessee, 5 catches, 70 yards, 2 touchdowns. Week 3 at Jacksonville, 7 catches, 104 yards. And then week 2, the down game, 3 catches, 65 yards. And last week at the Rams, 1 catch, 5 yards. So the pattern right now for Christian Kirk. Seems like one big game and then one game where he's non-existent, but he's too inconsistent for my taste here, is Christian Kirk. And yeah, I definitely could see him have a big game this week versus the San Francisco 49ers. But with so many options on this Cardinal offense, you just don't know who's going to have the big game besides Hopkins and a Chase Edmonds, and everyone else is a toss-up. So this week, I'm not going to take a chance, especially if you're 1-3 and you got to start a Christian Kirk. A good thing to do here. So that's a few wide receivers I would bench in week 5 of the fantasy football season.